Hi, I'm Dr. Mary Salcedo, and today I have Agile coach Doug Salcedo. We're going to be going through introductory presentation, Lean, Agile, and Academia. Doug has over 40 years of experience in project management, and I'm going to let him take it from here.
Thanks, Mary. Like Mary said, I've been doing technology in one shape or fashion for over 40 years. And whether it be hardware, systems, software, but more importantly, people, teams, and communities. And in the last several years, I've pivoted pretty much to supporting that idea that since people do all the work, what I'm making my career about at this point is helping people do it better, faster, less effort. And so today I'm going to bring forward some things that Mary and I have been talking about in terms of applying Lean and Agile to the academic and academic research environment. And so hopefully we're gonna talk you some things today that are going to pique your interest and maybe get you to do a little bit more study, maybe show up to one of our workshops and begin to move maybe yourself and your work environment towards a Lean Agile way of producing the value that is coming out of you and your team and your community. So let's get started. What we want to do is give you a basic understanding of Lean, Agiles, and principles. Why is Agile better and than traditional ways of doing things? What are some of the roles and responsibilities of teams that engage in Agile and Lean? And understand the key practices related to each of those areas where you can apply it. So have a good starting place to be able to approach implementing these values and practices, and then be ready to engage in some follow-on workshops where we're going to get our hands into how you would do it in your place of work. And then also just leave you with some information to be able to, on your own, continue your Agile learning journey. So, what is Agile? First of all, let's talk about what it is we're always trying to get done. We have outcomes and intentions, things we're trying to deliver and build in satisfaction of requests and our own desires to see things done. And all those things we call value. So we're talking about ways of building value. And when we talk about either product or project development, that's the process that starts with a valuable idea, light bulb time. And then we plan it, and then we do it, and then we check it, make sure that it meets the idea, and then we deliver it, and then we support it. Once it's out there, it usually needs some level of support, follow on, the next thing, and then we go into improving it. So when we look at project development, we realize then that the value is realized through execution of a managed process, and that good design and effective execution of that process optimizes value. And well-designed processes always provide for improvement. That feedback is so essential. And the faster we can get that feedback, the faster we can do improvement. Now, we've all heard of like Waterfall, or hopefully most of you heard about Waterfall project management, which is pretty much the process of conception. This is the idea. We get things rolling, we initiate it, we get approval, we get funding, we get a thumbs up to go move forward. And then we get into analyzing it and analyzing it and analyzing it. And then we get into past analysis, doing design work, so that we can actually go do the work of building the thing that we conceived of 4 steps back. And then we need to validate it, that is, test it. And then we're going to deploy it, deliver it, publish it, share the findings. And one thing that we want to recognize is that as we look at this managed process, it's managed and governed by things we call phase gates. In industry, each of these boxes has an entry and exit criteria. And we make ourselves kind of believe that we are actually making progress towards the goal by moving from conception to initiation to analysis to design, when the point of fact is we actually haven't done anything that is truly value creation until we get to build. And truly, we haven't done anything until we actually deployed it. So we call this phase gate waterfall type of delivery. And you can't start the next stage until you've completed the previous stage. At each stage, we look at the deliverables or the value of what we've done based on the deliverables that have been provided up to that point until we get to build. So we build documents along the way. And when we get finally to build, we start, finding out, well, you can't necessarily do it that way. Or when we present it to people who review that work, they kind of go, that's interesting, but I want it different. Changes in a waterfall project management are discouraged. By the time you go from conception all the way down to build, you've expended a lot of money and a lot of time, and there is such pressure and urgency on getting to deploy that the changes, even though they would benefit the customer, even though they would benefit the consumer of the work, are discouraged.
Feels
and
so
in
much
industry,
like
go
this
ahead,
is
Mary.
academia. Like a lot of this is academia, and you'll get suggestions right before you're about to deploy from maybe your thesis committee that's like, oh, this could be better. And you're like, it's taken me 5 years to get to this point.
Yeah, can you go back 3 years and start over?
Yeah.
And that actually may be the right thing to do, but it would have been much better to have found that out 3 years ago. Yeah. And we're going to talk about how that's possible with Agile. When you get to test, this is really where you find out things, whether what you've done holds together. In software development, if we have multiple teams working on things together, until we integrate all of their work, we really don't know if we have something that we can deploy. When we have research that is going on with multiple individuals and they're each kind of on their own path, until we integrate all of their work together, we really don't know what we like to know. But the progress of everyone on the way makes me feel like we're making progress. But really, progress is really defined when we put everything together, all of the people in the community, in the team, and then we do this cross analysis. It's this integration of everyone's work. And then we know whether we have something that we can truly deploy. Everything up to then has been work, and it's valuable work, and it's necessary to get to where we need to go. The question is, can we get there faster? So working against all of this, usually at conception, dates are laid in, or at least timeframes. You've got 5 years to do this. You've got 5 months to do this. You've got 5 weeks to do this. And so all of that operates as a back pressure against the value of what's being done. And so what you'd like to do is be able to either move that date or open up time or open up resources. One thing we're going to talk about later is how you, by applying Lean, for instance, and by applying Agile, you can actually open up resource capacity along the way so that you have more time with less pressure to get to the valuable outcomes that you need to, with less rework and having to go backwards as much or as far. So Waterfall is a staged sequential process. It's best used, and by the way, some things need to be Waterfall project managed. Like if you're building a bridge, you're really glad they're doing it in a Waterfall fashion. If you're doing an FDA double-blind study, because of the seriousness of the outcome, you're glad that they're doing it in a Waterfall project management method. So but usually they have all the requirements down to the eyelash up front, and they can be frozen there. Those things are very, tend to be document intensive. Waterfall project management has the appearance of being easier to control and manage, and it really likes to be hierarchical. It really likes to be authority driven. And the inputs of the people who are doing the actual, let's say, build process here, don't get to really engage too much in the conception and initiation phases. So it tends to honor and respect people a little bit less. Change tends to be very expensive because you got to go back so far, and it therefore is resisted. And we don't see working product, stuff that really has been integrated and worked until very late, usually too late. And really, we don't evaluate the value in terms of the receiver until the product or service is actually delivered. So for all these reasons, we'll want to take a look at different ways of doing it. But let's just compare that a little bit to a research or doctoral journey that looks a little bit like this. We got the problem, we define the goals, we divide into subproblems, we create hypotheses, we collect and organize data, and then we interpret the data and resolve and publish. And that, in terms of the entire research process, kind of looks like planning the study, literature review, implement, study and gather, analysis, interpretation, reporting. These are sequential left to right processes that take a lot of time. And the question is, do they apply themselves more to a waterfall or more to a lean and agile way of doing business? What we're going to be talking about here, obviously, is that the supposition is that they can be done in lean and agile. In fact, at the end of this video, I'm going to be showing you where in academia this has been applied very successfully. So you should have hope that you can move from left to right in the shortest sustainable lead time. All right. As we talked about, project management is moving from the big idea, breaking that big idea down into units of work that we can deliver on. Agile, specifically Scrum Agile, and we'll talk about why that's called Scrum Agile, starts with something called an epic. An epic is your big idea. And then you're going to break down that big idea into chunks that are meaningful to the consumer of what it is you're doing. So in terms of, let's say, a website, that would be having the login page. It would be having the user profile page where you can do your preferences and settings. It would be the catalog page where you can shop. It would be the payments page where you can make payments. It would be the shipping page where you can specify, how to get it to you. And so all these are major parts of the big idea of a commerce site. And we call those features. So those features are major aspects, deliverable aspects of the big idea. But we can't work just on all those features all at once. What we need to do is break those down into units of work that in Agile we call stories. And we're going to break down what features and stories look like and what their components are later. We'll have multiple features with multiple stories. And what we need to do is put those into a process that's not a big, huge cauldron of work. What we're going to do is we're going to slice it down and split it into small sprints, small runs. We're going to do these things, these 10 things as a team over the next 2 weeks or 2 months. And we're going to iterate on that. We're going to continue to work this backlog of stories down. And along the way, we're going to get to these features sooner than later. And as we get these features done, we're going to realize the epic. And we're going to do this in a circular, cadenced fashion. We're going to start the cycle. We're going to end the cycle. It's people-centric. And we go through a process of planning, design and development, test, that is validation, acceptance that the work is ready to move forward and be used, and then we deliver it, and then we review and we learn. This is the Agile cycle. And after the end of each cycle, we will do integration with other teams. We'll deploy that work into its use environment. And at some point, doing the release, understanding that getting work and putting it on the shelf ready to go is different than taking all of those elements, packaging them up and shipping them out to the customer. That's
I think
release.
it can be really difficult when you come in with like this idea, like I want to look at dragonfly flight, and you have like this big, I like that it's called epic idea. And then you're like, how do I break that down? And it does feel like it's all mashed in a big pot. So I like the idea of breaking it into bits and bits and bits.
And the other thing is that you can just think about and work on one feature initially. You don't have to work on all the features. You don't have to define all the features. You can have your teams or yourself start working on what you think is going to be the most key feature first. And if that feature bears fruit in terms of its outcome, then that informs whether you should move forward with the big idea or not. That is, every feature has a hypothesis of benefit. And if it doesn't meet that hypothesis of benefit, then it actually gives you data to question or not whether the big idea that you had is worth pursuing, or does it need to be refactored or reshaped in some fashion before you commit more time, more resource to the hypothesis that is in the epic. Because in Agile, everything has a hypothesis of benefit. It's got to justify its reason for existence, why is it here in this work plan? And then as you execute every story is an experiment. Every story is, if this doesn't work, we need to find out whether this works sooner than later. And so what we want to do is we call fail fast. And so
Agile, I
Agile,
like that.
You like that?
Fail fast.
Fail fast. So we create these time boxes and we say, we're going to get this amount of work done in this amount of time. And at the end of that, we'll either have work that moves forward or work where the hypothesis wasn't proved. And that work either needs to be refactored, or we have to go back and ask ourselves, the hypothesis of benefit at the feature or at the epic level, does that need to be revisited? Now, I know, Mary, that, in academic research, we start off with these hypotheses, but unfortunately, sometimes we don't find out soon enough where those hypotheses are in terms of their feasibility. And we don't prioritize necessarily the work and break out the work so that we can do the minimum amount of work as soon as possible to determine whether or not the line of inquiry is going to either validate or begin to validate or begin to question whether or not that the epic, the epic idea is still worth pursuing, and should we pivot to something else? So again, Agile's an iterative, I'll use the word again, iterative development process or research process, if we want to start talking about that way. It's best when the big idea can't be nailed down. It's best when it's going to be an evolving thing and may actually include points of revolution, not just evolution, where a small amount of data or progress can be the big reveal. And you need at that point maybe to, pivot and adapt around that all of a sudden explosion of revelation. And therefore we welcome change.
Yeah, I like that this is about change. It's about pivoting, and it's about just trying a thing with a plan, but accepting that the plan is going to change. Because I think sometimes we get wrapped up in the epic as academics and we forget to do.
Well, and we know the doing is out there, but we can spend too much time in the planning. Yeah. There's just, what we need to do is be comfortable with how much planning is enough to get started on the journey. Yeah. Right. And you need to know where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, as the saying goes. And so you need to know where you intend to go. But knowing exactly how you're going to get there That's the part that you're going to learn about. And by the way, you may find out along the way that it leads you someplace else. And I know a number of times innovation comes from we're headed one direction, and along the way we make discoveries that actually have more value than the thing that we were actually intending to go after. And we find those revolution points both in industry and in science, where the actual the greatest value of the project was not what you started out as, and you welcome that when it comes, and you're open to it, and you're not so single-minded about the outcome and the intention that you miss the opportunity to provide value wherever it comes. So the goal here is to produce some kind of working quote unquote product each cycle. That is something that can be demonstrated, shared, published, evaluated, so we can get that learning sooner, because the learning's in the doing. And it's very small team focused. When I say small teams, generally speaking, we're talking about anywhere from 3 people up to 11 people. It can be larger, it can be different, how it tends to be in industry. But this is Agile. We're going to come back to this a bit more later and dig into it. So just to compare the two methodologies, Waterfall versus Agile Scrum. Waterfall is kind of a requirements, design, implementation, and verification, and then deployment. So you get a big deployment here at the end with a little extra documentation, but we've really been documentation intensive along the way. Whereas incremental Agile delivery, we start out with as small a footprint of requirements and design as we can get away with, to be able to start the work, to validate that this line of inquiry, this line of development, this line of exploration is the direction we should be going. Which target should we hit? We've got only so much time, so much resource, and we want to manage risk in the process as well. So when we start planning and allocating, we're going to aim small, miss small, in terms of aiming at the bullseye, not just the whole target. So we're going to aim small at the center of the bullseye, and we're going to produce value against it. And that time box that we call a sprint, we're going to add incremental value in each and every sprint. So we're going to build the outcome along the way and build our documentation to the necessary level to support the delivery until finally we end at the final product. Now, one thing I need to point out here is the difference between the two boxes between Waterfall and Agile is the box on the Agile side will more fit the actual need than the Waterfall, because the Waterfall will conform itself to the original requirements. But what if the requirements change over time?
Or your animal dies, or you can't find it, or there's a pandemic.
You know, and you need to pivot, but since you have been funded to do a specific thing, if you don't deliver that thing, you won't get additional funding. It works this way in industry as well as in academia, I'm certain. And so we do this march towards an inevitable outcome that we've got a sinking feeling isn't going to do what we need it to do. And so we have to do follow-up studies or follow-up products afterwards to adjust to the correct target. Whereas in Agile, we are adjusting every sprint. We're building our requirements. We're getting a fuller understanding of a more mature understanding of what the target is and how to satisfy it. And we will adapt our methods, our timing, and the design of our sprints, our experiments, our data gathering, our inquiries, our data modeling along the way to optimize towards what's really needed. And you don't know what's really needed until you get something out there people can begin to evaluate and give you feedback on.
Like giving a presentation at a conference.
Presentation at a conference, or just within your peer group, within your own lab.
Yeah.
That is every 2-3 weeks, you're going to share where you are and share what you're in, and you'll know you'll know. So this is what I was going after. Here's what I learned. It either validated what I thought, which is awesome. I'll move to the next step, or what I learned may need me to pivot and adapt my plan. And as long as you have the ability to shape and adapt the outcome that you're trying to get to, then it works. If you're rigidly locked into the requirements, then Agile will optimize and make more efficient use of your resources along the way, and you will minimize risk by being able to know what works and what doesn't work. But Agile very much wants you to hold your requirements and your design with an open hand. And what is the intention and the value of that epic to the end user without being over specific about it? Because you think you know, but you really don't. The learning is in the doing. So they're very different processes. There are situations where you must use Waterfall, and Waterfall really is the best method. Each method has its pros and cons. Agile has been better suited to software technology and development, but as in this conversation today, it's not just for software and technology and development. It's being used everywhere. And there are hybrid models where we do a combination of Waterfall and Agile, and we call that Wagile. And some people might think that's a bad thing, but if you are lean and agile in your mindset, the practice that you follow, that it follows your need, that's more important than anything.
I hope that academics come out of this presentation asking, what do I need? That's and thinking about like, what is my value? I think those are really important questions to ask.
So again, I've talked about this lean agile mindset. What we need to do is understand from a values and principle point of view, what is lean and what is agile? And then we'll talk about practices after that. So first of all, they're interlinked. Lean led the way. I started out life as a manufacturing engineer, got to go to seminars with Dr. Deming. It just opened up my mind. It was mind blowing, where the whole point, yes, we want to be more efficient in the factory and not waste inventory and product, and that variation was very much an enemy, but it was very people-based. Anybody on the line could push a button, pull a chain, and the line would stop because they saw something that wasn't right, that needed to be fixed. It was very people empowering. This is where we got quality circles from. And it was really about, in the factory, providing the best value for people in society, since they made cars, in the shortest sustainable lead time, which, by the way, would be a profitable outcome because people would want your product. You would be producing it at the least cost with the highest profit margin that made people happy, and it was good for society as a result because people need to get from A to B. And so even though it started off in manufacturing through the Toyota production systems and what we call Six Sigma, which is a process methodology that aims to reduce the standard deviation under the Gaussian curve, so we get less variation, because in manufacturing, variation is kind of the enemy. It is branched out from there. And Lean, which came about a little over 20 years later, we're going to talk about the Agile Manifesto, but it is a team-based value delivery system. And while it started off in software, it was originated in 2001. But you're going to see where Agile basically stands on the shoulders of Lean, and they work together to achieve the kinds of levels of performance that you want your teams and communities to hit. So we're going to talk about Lean. Sustainable delivery of value is the goal. That is, we're going to try to deliver the most or best we can in the shortest sustainable lead time. Sustainability is critical here because a lot of times we push so hard and we get to the top of the mountain and we run out of oxygen and we get hypoxia and we fall off the cliff. And the falling's not the hard part, it's the sudden stop at the bottom. And you get burnout. And when you are doing these crash and burn cycles, your mind isn't sharp. You're not motivated. You're not your best. What we need to be able to do is hit a iterative, synchronized cadence of delivery that is sustainable
Yeah,
and
if you're
providing
working
that value.
yourself like hours and hours in the lab and you're like not also getting the rest you need, that's not a sustainable lead time to whatever product you're trying to create, and that burnout's gonna come.
Right. It's like filling a glass with water. And let's say that glass holds 10 ounces, but you pour 20 ounces into it. That glass can only still hold 10 ounces. And everything that flows over is waste.
Yeah.
And what you want to do is take the 20 ounces you have and pour it out in such a way as nothing is wasted. Very minimal amount is wasted. And so, besides providing the highest possible quality to customers and society as a whole, not just parts, but the whole of society, the whole of our customers, it's focused on high team morale, safety of those people, both physical and emotional and economic, and a bunch of other things that you could bring to the word safety. High morale, because if people do all the work and you want to unlock not just extrinsic motivations, which is on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I need to survive, I need to put food on the table, I need to have shelter, but how about intrinsic motivations? That internal drive that's usually attached to things like autonomy, a sense of mastery, and a feeling of purpose. That high team morale produces the best outcomes. When you are inspired as a person, you will perspire and not even know that you're breaking the sweat. So, and at the end of it, not just delivering what the customers asked for, but delighting the customer by going that extra mile. That's part of Lean as well. And it's one of the reasons why I love Lean. I love the whole concept here, and how I apply it to Agile. So I borrow this from Scaled Agile Incorporated, which I am certified to teach classes in. And we teach all the roles and the practices and how to basically scale this into very large endeavors. But this is called the House of Lean, and the roof is the value, and that's shortest sustainable lead time of value. 4 key pillars: respect for people and culture. People do all the work. And by the way, not just respect for the people doing the work that produce the outcome, but respect for the people who get the outcome. And then flow. We need to optimize that sustainable value delivery. We need to build quality in as we do it. And we need to move from an understanding where maybe that variability is the enemy to where variability is actually the opportunity to pivot and to do better. Innovation, it's kind of obvious, but unless you focus and make time for innovation, usually you don't get it, especially in industry. And so it's all about experimentation. It's about doing things you don't know whether what you've done is actually going to have value, but it's a line of inquiry and experimentation that if you get the right data back, you may pivot from the way you're doing it now in favor of the new way.
Does innovation ever go before flow? Or is it just like it can happen at any time?
It can happen at any time, but you usually have to make time for it. In your cadenced work, one thing you need to do is one of the stories you need to do, maybe an innovation story.
Oh, okay.
So or your team is going to work on it. It's just exploration. It's saying, we're going to need a solution to this. Let's do a hackathon, or maybe the field study or lab equivalent of a software hackathon. You're just going to get some people together and say, we have a problem to solve. We're each going to choose a different way to do it. And we're going to allow time and space for that to happen. Or you choose whatever it is you want to work on that you think might be a whole different way of going at this. And we're going to embrace the diversity that is in each of you in terms of how we're going to go solve that problem. Or I can do that with different teams, team A, team B, team C. Let's spend a Friday being innovative. That is, think outside the box, think crazy thoughts, pick anomaly points, right? And actually determine whether those are anomalies or is that data that's telling you something. So that's where innovation comes from. Innovation does not come from data points inside the box. Innovation comes from data points outside the box. And so you need to like inside out your whole way of looking at things. And once you create a cycle of doing that, and you get people to think innovatively, then it affects your planning. It affects the ideation of the big idea, because you're going to understand that maybe even before you lock down your big idea, you need to do experimentation. And that may create a line of inquiry where you're going to innovate along the way, but innovation becomes part of your culture. This is really culture building, folks. And the fourth pillar kind of wraps around it. So all of this is wrapped around this idea of better, faster, less effort. And we need to be relentless about that. That is, we live in a competitive world. You know, each of you are in institutions that are essentially, yes, collaborative, we're colleagues, we're also competing. We want our institution, our department, our team to be leaders, recognized as leaders. And when we make collaborations, we're looking to collaborate with the best, the brightest, those that are complement us, but we're always looking to improve, because the whole thing of research is to push back the darkness, to understand more, to be able to bring more to society and into the world. And we need to keep doing that and doing that, but it's not a linear proportional process. It's one that has explosive, asymptotic runs at the possibilities that are out there that we don't even know exist. And so we need to be relentless about that. We need to be intensely curious about not doing things the same, but how can things be done different, done better, right? And while you don't, change something, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. At least query yourself on that thing, because a lot of times when we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. And what this says is question everything. At some point, question everything, and don't accept that necessarily the way that things worked in the past for good reasons are things that are going to get you to the innovation and the results and the outcomes that you need in the future. The bottom of this is about leadership. And there's big L and there's small L. Leaders lead. Every team member has the opportunity to lead. Every person in society has the opportunity to lead. Now, big L's are people who have one-to-many type of positional influence in the world to affect good or not good. But they need support. If you're in a lean environment, the house of lean, then they're going to support these four pillars. In fact, they're going to teach these. In fact, they're going to model these four pillars and keep people focused on the goal and the value. But each of us, where we are, can be this, can teach it, can influence the people around us.
So like a faculty member doing this, in a sense, distributes leadership among each of their team, their grad students, their undergrads, their everyone, so that you share the load almost as you're going through a process?
If you have a leader who is leading in this way, they will help create a culture where everyone has shared responsibility for all of these things. And then that leader doesn't have to be there, and it still happens. All right, let's talk about some of the basics of Lean, the very basics. And there's these 5 steps here. The first is know what value is. That is, from your customer's perspective, empathize with them and express value in terms that they would use of the thing that's being delivered. So you need to say, well, what am I delivering? And what value? You may say, well, this is what value it has to me. I get a doctorate out of it. Or I get funding for this, which allows me to pay for things. But from the people who are consuming it, whether that be your community, whether that be an industrial sponsor, what's the value that they're looking for, and be able to describe it in their terms. Because if you want to do this over and over and over again, it's less about you and more about your customers. And then once you understand that, then you have to say, well, in a default mode, how would I go produce that? That is, I have this value and I want to flow it from point A to point Z. What are the various steps on this value stream, this value river, that I go and I stop in at? And I do this, and I do an activity, I do this, I do an activity, I do this, do an activity. I do a side branch down here, and I come back into the river. What is the map that value makes as it builds and grows along your value stream? That is essentially your work process. And what you're looking to do is just describe from a default point of view initially how you think work's going to get done. And then you look at it from a standpoint of which of these adds value and which of these specifically don't add value. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Not just to you, but how you use the resources that you have available to you to get from A to Z in the shortest sustainable period of time that delivers the optimal, best, maximum value to your service, to your customers. And as you do that, you will begin to establish flow. Rather than spending a lot of time here and then waiting forever for something to get out, you're going to establish flow. What you want to do is see things moving from left to right on a regular cadence and consistent basis, right? Rather than something being here and then you make a whole bunch of progress. And so, but you don't get the learning till way out here. So what we want to do is we want to establish flow with very small feedback loops so that we get that experimental information and knowledge as we go. And then what we can do is that we can change the trajectory of our lines of inquiry, of our projects, such that they deliver the best value in a sustainable fashion. The fourth step is to implement pull. And what that says is, as you have all these places where you stop in at and you do activities, work activities, you want to make sure that you aren't inundated and overwhelmed by the proximate and the urgent. What does that mean? That means is that the previous step, let's say, piles up 10 things for you to do. And as humans, especially when we got people looking at us, we'll try to work on all 10 things at the same time. And what this produces is context switching. And the science shows that we can lose up to 20% of our productive capacity. That is, in a 2-week period, just on the weekdays, 10 days, you can lose 2 days of productive capacity trying to work all those 10 things at the same time.
Wow.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And then when you add tear down and setup time to it, it can even be more than that. And if you're wondering, well, what should I do next? You can add more time to it. And so you can really erode your resource capacity to do things by trying to work on all these 10 things at the same time, as opposed to saying, I'm going to choose 2 to 3 things to work on. Maybe just one thing, because think about it. If we just did one thing and we got that thing done, then it could move on to the next stage, and then it would move on. Yeah. And then we just pull the next one in and it would go on. And if you try to do all 10, it's going to take 10 times as long for any one thing to happen. And what we want to do is shuttle things down to the next step.
I feel like this happens to me a lot, where I'll have 10 things to do. And I think it's because I haven't established flow, where you develop the context for how long that task should take. And then I have maybe big data tasks that I know need to take like 2 to 3 weeks. And it's hard for me to commit that time, but then it would be gone if I just did it.
Yep. And so what we do is we implement what we call a work in process limit. That is, once we have work to do, that work is in our process. And what we're going to do is focus. We're going to just choose the 2 or 3 next best things to do, because usually just one thing is not feasible. Usually your brain needs the time off, or you're waiting for something. and you'll work on 2 or 3 things at a time. But you'll get those 2 or 3 things done, and then you work on the next 2 or 3 things, and you get those done, and you get those done, and you get those done, and you get those done. You'll get it done in 3 times faster fashion. So you've enjoyed a 300% improvement in actual productivity. You say, well, you know, it all takes the same amount of time. Was I don't remember context switching? You lost 20% right there. The other thing is, if you get that thing down the line and that next thing down the line says, yeah, not so much, you're delaying the learning by not getting something down the line. And you're not going to get the feedback on whether what you did hit the mark or not until you move it down the line. Now, if you move all 10 down the line and you have multiple things that not so much on, now all of a sudden you have this explosion of rework. And meanwhile, by the way, things are still coming in.
Yeah.
And it can get very overwhelming very fast. So when you implement what we call work and process limits, we move from a push-oriented to a pull-oriented system that provides outcomes sooner, provides us to do fast learning, and provides focus and gives us this feeling of sustainability as we do our work. So that would lead us to step 5, which is when you look at this, as we go through it, we're gonna try to learn how we can eliminate waste. And one of the big areas, by the way, that waste comes in is delays. So we try to look at wherever there are bottlenecks and where we can add value. And that's the relentless improvement piece of this, which is we just work it to perfection. We make this baby shine. And we do this every cycle of Agile. We're looking to how can we make this better, faster, with less effort. And there's some advanced principles, so we can look at this where, you know, we eliminate waste, we create knowledge, we build quality in, we do fast delivery, empower your team, we delay decision making, and we optimize the whole. These are some other principles that we'll talk about in more detail in the workshop. One of the things I just want to introduce to you again is this idea of eliminating waste. Lean is leaning. That is when you lean a carburetor out, you're able to get the best air to fuel mixture, right? To produce the most power with the least amount of resource. Excuse me. And so these wastes we call non-value added, or NVAs, and there's 7 types of them. There's just work that is incomplete and it was just partial work that never gets done. It was something that was asked for that we didn't end up needing. That's number 2. Another could be extra documentation that really wasn't needed, but someone felt was needed, but really wasn't needed to push the thing from left to right. Number 4 was that task switching thing I just talked about, the context switching. Number 5 can be waiting for things that are delays. And how can you eliminate those delay points?
Yeah, permits, permissions, yeah, all that.
You know, it is handoffs. When you can have in software development, you know, we can have database people, we can have middleware people, we can have people who do the front end, the UX, user experience, or we can have a developer who can do all 3. If you're running a race and that's a 5,000 meter race, you know, the question is who finishes it faster, the single runner who maybe runs a little bit slower, or the relay team who has to do a baton handoff? The answer is always the single runner. And so one of the things you want to do is look at how you can either have fewer handoffs, or the handoffs that you have are really good. No dropped batons, no opportunities for failure in those handoffs. The value of things are always expressed in the handoffs. In systems, one system talking to another system, whatever we do to improve value in either one of those systems, it's the interface between them where we hand off value between them. And then finally, you know, whenever the work that we do isn't the work that is needed and it has to be fixed, defects is always a source of waste. So in Lean, And in this relentless improvement, we're looking to eliminate waste. And in a lot of our processes, we will find ample opportunity to improve in this area. The next area we're going to talk about is the principles and values underlying Agile. And the Agile Manifesto, again, was come up in 2001 with a bunch of leaders in software development. And they got together, had some beer and pizza in Utah, probably did a little bit of skiing along the way. And they made the statement that we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it, learning these in the doing, and helping others do it. Through this work, we've come to value these 4 things. Now, what the very first thing that they came up with when they were sitting around in a chalet was people do all the work. That is, we're going to value individuals' interactions over processes and tools. You need processes and tools. You need a lab, but it's the people who come to the lab that are really the important thing. And so what we want to do is have the processes and tools serve individuals and the interactions they have, because that's where the value is created. We value work.
That hits really deep.
Does it? Does it?
Yeah, because I feel like people will come in and they might not always feel valued, or maybe the institution at large makes them feel unvalued. And a lot of graduate students are trying to unionize so that the universities actually recognize that they have value. They might be valued in their own lab, but not on the broader scale. And it's a lot.
Well, it happens everywhere. And in society as a whole, we want to focus on the process because you can control that and you control people through the process. But really, if people do all the work and people consume all the value, then aren't individuals and their interactions the most important thing? Yeah. This would say yes, and make it your top priority. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Documentation is important. You have to have documentation around the things that you've produced. And I like to say working stuff instead of working software, whatever your stuff is. What you need to do is balance the two, but really, until you have working stuff, you really don't have anything. That is, software that's not coded and not working, which means it's also been integrated with other people's work. So it does the feature that supports the epic, isn't worth much. And all the documentation in the world isn't going to, have consumers buy any of it. So what you want is working stuff over, not instead of, comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And what this says is that before you come up with your quid pro quo, your statement of equity between 2 people, is know them, develop empathy for each other. It makes it a whole lot easier to create an equitable and fair contract when both parties have an understanding of each other. And in that collaboration, you also create opportunity. An opportunity, if you want to delight your customer, you need to collaborate with them. And it's then codify the quid pro quo in a contract, but make that contract flexible to the ongoing evolution of your customer collaboration. By the way, your customers, whoever consumes your work. So in a lab, if you're doing one part of the genomic sequence and you hand it off to another person, they are your customer. Everyone who consumes your work, the next stage down, or the stage after that, is in your community of customers. And then the final one is understanding we have plans. We have to have plans. If you don't know where you're going, any road leads you there. You need to be a responder to change, because change happens. Everything in the universe vibrates. Unless you're at minus 273 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 0 degrees Kelvin, things move. Things have motion. And therefore, and even, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle says that even when you go to measure something, it ain't there no more. Or we get quantum entanglement between 2 particles in the universe. We have a plan, but things change. You can never say with any finite precision that something that is going to be that thing. It's always a probability game. And so in that probability game that is life, I have a plan. I hold that plan with an open hand. And what I'm going to be ready to do is be agile. I'm going to be ready to pivot and adapt as conditions, the environment, and the data, because a plan is nothing more than a hypothesis, right? So when data comes in that suggests that the hypothesis might need to be amended or is not true, and now I need a new hypothesis that I'm going to test against, I need to be ready to respond to change. So I want to be a responder to change over dogmatically following a plan. And what they said is, while we have, there's value in items on the right, but we value the items on the left more. And that led them to a statement of principles. I'm not going to read through every one of these. I've summarized these in blue. So the text in black, and you can go read this on agilemanifesto.org, is let's satisfy our customers, let's welcome change, let's deliver frequently. Business and the people who represent the consumers of our work need to work together daily or often. We need motivated teams. We need social connectivity. We need working stuff. We need sustainable delivery pace. We need to imbue everything we do with technical excellence. And we need to use the KISS principle and know that simplicity, which is the art of maximizing the work not done, is essential. That, folks, is lean.
KISS, by the way, is keep it simple, stupid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking for people
I just
watching.
say silly. Keep it simple, silly.
Yeah.
And that things, the best outcomes come from teams, come from collaboration, come from people working together with people. You are never, ever alone in what you do. There are people who support you. There are people who provide to you. There are people who you provide to. And no one is an island. And the best things that we do come from an understanding that we do them within community. And then the last is in everything you do, pause and reflect regularly. That's the inspect and adapt. At Pace University, they took a look at this and they said, do we want to do things in an agile fashion? So they said, they want to do early and continuous delivery of valuable dissertation product. They welcome changing requirements even late in the research process. They deliver working dissertation product frequently. They measure progress primarily through useful research deliverables. They use agile processes for sustainable research, enabling sponsors, researchers, and other team members to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. And they value simplicity as the art of maximizing the work not done. This ends this portion of our video presentation. In the next one, we're going to be getting into the hows. And we're going to talk about the value hierarchies, how we break those epics, features, and stories down. We're going to talk about specific work practices. And then we're going to wind it up with a talk about where this is being done in different academic environments to be able to give you and tease you with how this is possible to do where you live. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. See you next time.